If you grew up anywhere near these mountains, you already know how it is. Folks don't sit around making up stories. They pass down the ones they can't forget. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? Kinda crazy when you think about it. All of us sitting in the dark, listening to the same story from different corners of the map. Go ahead and hit like and subscribe, so more people can find their way into these woods, even if they probably shouldn't. Alright, here we go. My name's Martin. I'm 43 and, until last winter, I was a high school art teacher in Knoxville. After the district shut down half its programs, I lost my position, and with it the only anchor that had kept me in the city. My marriage had dissolved years earlier, and my daughter barely picked up the phone anymore, busy with college life and pretending her father was just another name in her contacts list. I didn't want to keep teaching substitute classes, and I didn't want to live on the noisy edge of the interstate. So I decided to do what I had always talked about doing but never had the courage for. Buy a place away from everything, somewhere I could paint, carve wood, and maybe remember how silence feels. That's how I ended up in Laurel Fork, near the ridges that split Virginia and West Virginia like a scar. A realtor found me a weather-beaten cabin that had sat unsold for nearly a decade. The woman muttered something about locals avoiding the area, but she stopped herself before saying more. I didn't care. I wanted solitude, and solitude was cheap here. The cabin sagged on one side. The porch leaned as if exhausted from decades of standing, but the trees stood so thick around it that sound itself seemed muffled. No traffic, no neighbors, no damn lawn mowers at dawn. I signed without haggling. Most days I fixed small things, split wood, and worked on sketches I told myself would someday become canvases. My only company was a hound named Jasper, too old to chase deer anymore, but loyal enough to follow me room to room. Nights were quiet in a way the city never is, so still that the ticking of the wood stove expanding after a fire sounded like gunshots. I liked it that way until last Thursday. I'd been refurbishing an old shed, trying to turn it into a studio, so I wouldn't keep dripping paint on the cabin floor. The work stretched past 10, my lantern dim, and my patience gone. On the path back to the house, a path I had walked 100 times, I tripped on a knot of roots. I cursed, caught myself on my palms, and the lantern swung in a wide arc. Its glow brushed across the ground, and that's when I saw the grooves. They weren't scuffs from boots or animal tracks. They were deliberate, etched deep into the gravel as though 3 enormous nails had been pressed side by side into the earth and dragged with impossible steadiness. The spacing was too wide for bare claws, too perfect to be random. I crouched, traced one with my fingers, and felt edges sharper than broken glass. The ground around them was undisturbed, no loose soil, no skid marks, just 3 clean crescents cutting across the path. I stood frozen, heart hammering in my ears. The trees around me swayed without wind. Jasper wasn't with me. He had stayed in the cabin that evening, sleeping by the stove, but suddenly I wished he had followed. I hurried back to the cabin, locked every latch, even the cellar door I usually ignored. Jasper met me at the door, hackles raised, staring at nothing I could see. I poured whiskey into a chipped mug and sat near the stove, trying to convince myself it was teenagers or hunters with some twisted sense of humor. It was just after 1 when Jasper growled. Not a bark. He didn't bark much anymore, but a low, rattling rumble that stiffened his whole body. His eyes locked on the side window. I pulled the curtain with 2 fingers and saw the silhouette. At first it looked like a tall branch, crooked in the moonlight. But then it shifted. 8 feet, maybe more, too thin yet too heavy for a trick of the trees. Its arms hung unnaturally long, and its posture was wrong, bent as though it had grown upward without ever learning balance. I let the curtain fall. My breath fogged the glass of my mug. I turned off every light, one by one, until the cabin was a coffin of darkness. Then came the sound tap, tap, tap. It came not from outside, but from inside the walls. Slow, deliberate, like knuckles mapping the shape of the house. From the pantry corner it moved clockwise, each room, each wall, announcing itself with a patient rhythm. Jasper pressed against my thigh so hard it hurt, his body trembling. The tap stopped. The silence stretched thin. I crept to the back door and flicked on the porch light. Nothing. The shed stood unbothered, the yard empty. I stepped onto the porch, pistol heavy in my hand. The air was colder than it had any right to be, burning my lungs. Then I saw it again. Same place between the trees. Same crooked height. Only now its head tilted, listening. The porch bulb buzzed, dimmed, and steadied. I backed inside. That's when I heard my name. Not shouted. Spoken. But it was my own voice. "Come on out, Martin." The sound drifted from the front window. I hadn't spoken, yet the tone was identical. Same inflection, same rasp from years of too many cigarettes. "Come on out, Martin," it repeated, over and over, quickening like a broken record. Then the words warped. Consonants cracked, vowels dragged into clicks and guttural growls. Layers of voices overlapped, men, women, children, all trying to use my throat at once. The tapping in the walls resumed, frantic now, racing around me. I dropped to the pantry, bolted the door, clutched the pistol until my fingers went numb. Jasper lay across my legs, his body vibrating like a plucked string. That's when the whistling began. 5 notes. Low, rising, falling, repeated endlessly. I remembered an old man in the hardware store warning me offhandedly the first week I moved here. If you hear whistling at night in Laurel Fork, don't answer. Don't follow. It's not for you. I had laughed, thinking it backwoods superstition. Now, in the dark pantry, that tune scraped against my skull like a fishhook. At 2:30 something landed on the roof. Heavy. Sheets of tin groaned under the weight. Long claws scraped as it crawled slowly, methodically. It was searching. Then, thud, the weight dropped into the yard. The porch bulb popped, glass raining on the steps. Every light in the cabin flickered. Voices, dozens, rose in unison. "We are listening." I forced my eyes shut, but curiosity betrayed me. Through the pantry crack I saw it at the window. Its face was stretched too tight, skin smooth where a mouth should be. Yet I felt a smile in my chest, not in my eyes, as if the expression had been pressed inside me. It leaned close, not blinking. Then it left. I must have fainted. When dawn came, the pantry door was half open. Jasper hadn't moved from my side. I stumbled outside, desperate for evidence. The claw marks on the path were gone, gravel smoothed as if raked by invisible hands. The trees stood silent, save one. A single strip of bark had been peeled 8 feet up a maple trunk, the flesh of the tree bleeding sap. That strip was rammed into the earth like a stake, marking the place. I stood staring until my legs gave way. Since that night, I haven't slept. Jasper won't go near the windows. But the worst part isn't the memory of what I saw, it's the sound. Every night, without fail, 5 notes whistle through the woods, low and patient. And sometimes, when I'm too tired to think clearly, I almost feel like answering back. I was 32 the summer I agreed to hike into the Brackenridge Highlands. I worked nights at a hospital in Charleston back then, long shifts in fluorescent light that left my skin gray and my nerves wired. I told myself I needed fresh air, that a weekend in the mountains would be good for me. Though truthfully, I just didn't want to leave my younger cousin Sam to wander into trouble alone. He had gotten obsessed with strange mountain stories after stumbling on some archived message board about things the Park Service doesn't mention. He was the kind of person who fell into rabbit holes without climbing back out. One week it was Bigfoot tracks, the next it was abandoned mining towns, then it was half-forgotten folklore he insisted was hidden on purpose. He talked constantly about lost fire towers, ghostly figures, places where compasses spun wrong. What pulled him deepest was a thread about the hollow-eyed man. According to one scattered post, it wasn't a campfire tale people repeated for tourists. It was something whispered, passed along in fragments, something locals didn't like outsiders to know. The story went that if you spotted him in the trees and looked away, he would step closer. If you dared look back a second time, he would take you, not in the way of a normal death, but gone as if you'd been written out of the world. "Not missing," Sam said, quoting the words he had memorized from a screen. "Erased." I told him it sounded like forum creepypasta, the kind teenagers used to win contests. He grinned and said, "So let's go find him." I should have laughed it off. Instead, when he showed up at my apartment with a printed map and a pack already strapped tight, I grabbed my boots. He was family, and if he got lost chasing shadows, I'd never forgive myself. We drove north through small towns until the pavement gave way to gravel. A leaning wooden post at the turnoff carried a single word painted in red, half faded by rain, no. That should have been enough for me to call it. Instead, we parked under pines and shouldered our bags. The first stretch was easy, an official trail with white blazes painted on trunks, the usual carved planks marking elevation. For miles in, Sam stopped mid-sentence. He stepped off the trail and into brush, following what looked like no more than a deer track. No markings, no sign it had ever been part of the park's system. He didn't explain, only turned to me with a lopsided smile and said, "This is it." I followed, though unease pressed on me from the start. The silence was wrong. No birds, no chirr of insects, not even the rustle of squirrels. It wasn't peaceful quiet. It felt packed, as if the whole forest was holding its breath. Sam didn't notice. He was talking about a settler from the 1800s who supposedly lived out there, killed his wife, burned his home, and vanished barefoot into the woods. His excitement sounded distant, muffled, like my ears were stuffed with cotton. The deeper we pushed, the narrower the trees pressed. At one point I had to turn sideways, pack scraping bark, to squeeze through. The light dimmed early, the canopy knitting itself thicker. Hours later, when the woods finally opened, we stood in a clearing 30 feet across, where stones jutted from the ground in a rough square. Moss draped them like old skin, vines creeping across the collapsed foundation. Sam's face lit up. He leapt down, sketchbook out, snapping pictures and tracing the outlines of rooms that hadn't been lived in for more than a century. On one wall, I saw carving gouged deep into stone. The grooves were crooked, ragged, but unmistakably letters. "Look away first," and he follows. I stared too long. Something about the way the lines curved inward made my stomach knot. We camped beside the ruins. The fire threw little light, swallowed by the trees. Sam sketched until midnight, his pen scratching furiously. I chewed jerky, watching shadows lean at the edge of the firelight, convinced they shifted when I blinked. When I finally crawled into my tent, sleep didn't come. At 2, I gave up and stepped outside to relieve myself. The dirt was cold, gritty under bare feet. That's when I saw it, movement in the trees. Not walking, standing. 7 feet tall at least, narrow, arms dangling too long, body bent in ways bones shouldn't allow. I couldn't see its face. I blinked. It was gone. I backed into the tent, shook Sam awake. He muttered without opening his eyes, "He's just watching." My blood froze. "Who?" He didn't answer. He rolled over and went silent. I sat awake until dawn. By morning, my nerves were shredded. I told Sam we were leaving. He didn't argue. He just paced the clearing, eyes fixed on a narrow path leading deeper into the woods. "There's more," he whispered. "I can feel it." I told him no. If he wanted to go further, he was doing it alone. He gave me a calm look, not angry, not pleading, just certain. "Wait here." 10 minutes. Then he disappeared between trees. I sat on the ruined wall, knife in hand, heart thudding like it was trying to crack ribs. Leaves twitched, and I flinched each time. After 15 minutes, footsteps crunched. Relief surged. Then Sam stepped out, but not Sam. Same clothes, same bag, same walk, but his eyes were empty sockets, hollow pits that seemed to drink the light. His smile stretched too far across his face, skin pulled like taffy. "You looked first," he said. His voice scraped, layered, wrong. Then his grin widened. I ran. Branches lashed my arms, tore my shirt. Twice I tripped and clawed back up. The forest tilted wrong, trees leaning at angles that made no sense. My boots hit ground, but made no sound. The air thickened like syrup. I glanced back once and wished I hadn't. The thing wore Sam's clothes, but its elbows bent backward, its pale arms stretched too long, its sockets yawning black. I didn't stop until the trees spat me onto gravel. The car came into view. I dove inside, slammed the door, and roared the engine to life. I left the tent, the packs, everything. The passenger door rattled half, opened the whole drive back, swinging as though waiting for someone to climb in. Search teams went out for weeks. Rangers, dogs, volunteers. They found the campsite. They found the stone foundation. But beyond that, nothing. No footprints. No broken brush. No sign Sam had ever gone further. They marked it down as misadventure. Maybe he slipped. Maybe a bear. Maybe he just kept walking. I know better. It's been years. I never went back. I won't step into those mountains again. But sometimes, late on my shift when the hospital halls are empty, I catch my reflection in a window. and for a split second, my eyes looked hollow. I was 35 when I decided to disappear for a while. I'd been working as a paramedic in Roanoke, and years of night shifts, sirens, and the constant sight of blood had worn me into something I barely recognized. It wasn't a dramatic collapse, no crying in stairwells, no midlife breakdown. It was quieter, like someone had turned the dimmer switch down inside me and forgotten to turn it back up. When my last partner transferred stations, I used that as an excuse to take leave. I told people I needed time off to clear my head, but what I really wanted was to be unaccounted for. I rented a cabin in the Allegheny Highlands, close to the West Virginia border. It was cheap, listed under one of those websites where the photos are blurry and the description makes neglect sound quaint. The listing called it rustic, private, and ideal for disconnecting. That turned out to mean the driveway was cracked with weeds, the siding peeled like sunburnt skin, and inside there was nothing but a sagging mattress, a warped table, and a chair that looked like it had been stolen from a church basement. Perfect. I didn't want comfort. I wanted silence. The first day, I barely moved. I collapsed on the mattress and slept so deeply it felt surgical. The second day I wanted real food and drove until I found a town with one main street, the kind of place where the gas station doubles as the post office. A squat diner sat at the corner, windows fogged with years of grease. Inside, a flickering light hummed overhead. A man behind the counter rinsed mugs that didn't look clean, and a single customer sat in the corner with a bowl of grits, scooping with saltines instead of a spoon. I asked for coffee. That was all. But as soon as I spoke, the old man in the corner raised his head. His eyes were watery but sharp. He stared at me too long and said, in a voice that had no tremor, "Don't step past the broken cedar." I blinked, half smiling because I thought maybe I misheard. He didn't smile back. His hand stayed flat on the table, like he was bracing against something. He went on, "If you pass it, you'll see her. She don't walk like we do. She'll go backward. If you let her lead, you won't come back." The man behind the counter set my coffee down like nothing had happened, like this wasn't the strangest thing a stranger had ever said to me. I muttered thanks, finished the cup, and left. But when I got in my car, the old man was still watching me through the smudged glass. That night, I couldn't stop replaying it. Not because I believed him, folklore didn't scare me, but because his words had hooked into me in that offhand way that certain sentences do, like a splinter you can't dig out. I had saved a few local blog posts before the trip in case I got bored without signal. One of them was about backwoods legends, phantom dogs, corpse lights, mountain witches. Near the bottom was a short paragraph about something called the Backward Lady. It said if you passed a cedar tree split open by lightning, you might glimpse her ahead of you, drifting backward down the trail. She wouldn't look at you. She wouldn't turn around. But if you followed, even by accident, you wouldn't return the same. The detail that bothered me most wasn't the blog. It was that I had already marked a trail near the cabin to hike the next morning. And when I checked the saved map, the photo of the trailhead included what looked like a tree split down the middle. I told myself it was coincidence, the kind you laugh about later. The next morning I drove out. The parking lot was empty. No other cars. That made me happy. No forced small talk. No strangers asking where I was from. I shouldered my bag and started down the path. The trail began ordinary enough. Fallen leaves, clay slick underfoot, trees spaced just tight enough to feel boxed in, but not suffocated. My breathing found a rhythm. My head, for once, quieted. That's when I saw it. The cedar stood ahead, its trunk split clean from root to crown, two halves leaning outward like a mouth pried open. It didn't look natural, not shattered by age or storm, but pulled apart with intent. Sap crusted its edges like dried blood. I stopped. My body tightened, urging me to turn around. But I pushed forward. I wanted to believe in nothing but coincidence. About 15 minutes later, something flickered between the trees ahead. White fabric. At first I thought it was trash caught on a branch. Then it moved. A woman. She glided backward down the trail. Not stumbling, not once checking over her shoulder. Her feet skimmed leaves without sound. Her hair hung dark and straight. She didn't turn, didn't pause. She simply kept retreating, smooth and certain, as though rewinding. I froze. Every instinct screamed to look away, so I did. I spun back toward the split cedar, heart drumming. My boots thudded the ground louder than they should have, every step booming. When I reached the cedar, I made the mistake of glancing back. She was there, closer now, still moving backward, each step perfect, fluid. I ran. Branches whipped my arms. The trail pitched steep and uneven. My breath tore my chest raw. I didn't look back again until the shimmer of my car's roof broke the tree line. Only then did I dare, and the path behind me was empty. In the cabin that night, I couldn't rest. I scrolled through the photos on my phone until the battery gave out. In the shot of the split cedar, I noticed something I hadn't seen while standing there. Just beyond the tree's shadow, faint but undeniable, was a pale sliver, like the curve of a face watching. At 3:07 a.m., a knock woke me. Soft, calm, not pounding, just knuckles against wood. I held my breath. The knock came again, slower, then once more lower, like from the base of the door. Jasper, the old hound who'd been sleeping at the cabin when I arrived, whimpered under the table. I hadn't thought much about him before then. He belonged to nobody, just lingered around. But that night he pressed close to me, ears flat. I stayed awake until dawn. As soon as light bled through the window, I packed. Clothes crammed, food left behind. I drove south until the mountains shrank in my mirrors. I told myself it was nerves, exhaustion, leftover stories mixing with loneliness. But 2 days later, in a truck stop bathroom, I caught my reflection under fluorescent light. For a fraction of a second, my body shifted wrong. My reflection turned its head slightly backward, and I swear it smiled. I was 28 the summer I agreed to watch over a cabin in the Canaan Valley. I'd just left my job as a graphic designer in Richmond after months of grinding deadlines that left me feeling like every part of me was pixelated and blurry. My girlfriend had told me I didn't know how to just exist anymore, and maybe she was right. When a family friend mentioned a retired couple, Martha and Jim, who needed someone to house-sit their place for a week while they visited their daughter in Ohio, I said yes before hearing the details. I wanted out of my apartment, out of the buzzing city, out of my own head. The directions were messy, handwritten notes and landmarks instead of mile markers. After an hour of winding through gravel switchbacks with my phone's signal flickering in and out, I pulled up to the cabin. No neighbors, no towers on the horizon. Just the press of trees on every side and a silence so thick it felt padded. The place had that weathered, postcard look, dark timber logs, a porch that leaned a little too much, rocking chairs that didn't match. Jim handed me the keys and rattled off reminders. Feed Daisy twice a day. Keep the stove stocked. Ignore the raccoons if they knock over the trash cans. Then they drove off in a truck that sounded like it wanted to retire too, waving as if this was a normal Saturday and not the start of something I'd regret for the rest of my life. Daisy was their shepherd mix, graying muzzle, slow-moving but still sharp behind the eyes. She greeted me with one stiff tail wag and a heavy sigh, as if I'd interrupted her nap. She wasn't a bark-at-everything type, which made what happened later harder to brush off. The first day passed easily enough. I read an old paperback left on the nightstand, made pasta, let Daisy out a few times. She never strayed far. Each time she reached the tree line, she paused, sniffed, then did a deliberate circuit along the edge before retreating to the porch. She wouldn't push deeper into the woods, no matter how much I coaxed. That night, I had just settled into bed when Daisy jolted upright. No bark at first, just a rigid stance, ears pinned, staring at the front door. Then one low, deliberate bark. Not the casual squirrel-spotted sound, but something darker, older. I got up, annoyed, and opened the door. The porch light barely reached the first row of trees. I couldn't see anything, but I heard it, a crack of a branch. Not the faint rustle of a deer or the crash of a bear, but close, too close, and hollow, like the sound had nowhere to travel. It felt pressed against my ear, despite coming from the woods. I shut the door fast and locked it. The second day, restlessness gnawed at me. I took a trail downhill behind the cabin, just wanting to stretch my legs. Daisy refused to come. I whistled, shook her leash, even dangled a biscuit. She stayed planted on the porch, head low, eyes following me as if warning me. The path was overgrown, not used often. After 20 minutes, I came across a weather-stained post with a rusted metal plate nailed to it. The words were barely legible, but I made them out, Ash Fork Hollow. The name was cliché enough to make me laugh nervously. I took a picture, intending to show friends later, proof of how authentic the wilderness was. But standing there, the humor bled out. The woods were silent. Too silent. My own breathing felt wrong. That night, brushing my teeth in the small bathroom, I heard it. My name. Not shouted, not whispered. Just spoken. Daniel. It came from outside. The sound was raw, like the voice had been dragged over gravel before reaching me. I froze, toothbrush still in my mouth. Daisy rolled over in the hall, stiffened, and let out a low whine, staring at the wall facing the woods. I turned off the bathroom light and crawled to the window. At the edge of the porch light, something shifted. Not walking, standing. Tall. Too tall. The limbs didn't hang right. When it moved, its joints snapped into place like a marionette pulled by strings. Then it slid behind a tree and was gone. I didn't move for the rest of the night. The next morning, I circled the cabin. Daisy refused to step off the porch, nails clicking against the boards as she leaned forward just enough to watch me. I found nothing. No prints, no broken branches. Just quiet. Heavy quiet. But when I followed the same trail as the day before, I saw it. A circle of stones, 20 or so, arranged perfectly on the ground. In the center, a single stick jammed upright into the soil. Not fallen there, placed. I crouched, took a photo, and the moment my phone clicked, a breeze swept across my face. The trees didn't sway. The air itself had moved, like something tall had passed just above me. I spun. Nothing. That evening, Daisy growled before sunset. Not casual. This was deep, primal, shaking her whole chest. She parked herself by the basement door, refusing to leave it. I checked, expecting raccoons. Instead, I saw smeared marks. Not scratches. Smears. As if someone or something had pressed damp hands against the door and dragged them down. I opened it anyway, flashlight trembling in my hand. Daisy followed halfway before locking her body, claws clicking on the step. She growled toward the far wall. Then I heard it again. Daniel. The same grit-filled voice, vowels stretched, my name pulled like taffy. I backed up the stairs without turning from that wall, heart hammering. Daisy followed, hackles up. I locked the door. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, Daisy pressed against my leg. At exactly 3:18 a.m., it came again, scraping at the front door. Slow, deliberate, nails on wood. Then 2 soft knocks. And then the voice. Daniel. A pause. Let me in. I crawled to the peephole, stomach turning. At first, nothing. Then something slid into view. It looked almost human, but the proportions were wrong. Legs too long, shoulders too narrow, skin gray and taut like stretched wax paper. Its head tilted, as if it couldn't balance the weight of its own skull. And it was smiling. Not with lips, those were cracked and thin, but with a twitching, wrong expression, as if a smile had been stapled onto its face. I slammed the peephole cover shut, shoved furniture against the door, and didn't move until sunlight leaked through the curtains. The couple returned that afternoon. I said nothing beyond Daisy was good, everything went fine. They didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer answers. But before I left, I checked the porch one last time. Right beneath the peephole, another circle of stones had been laid, identical to the one in the woods. I drove until the mountains were behind me, stomach knotted. It's been years since then. I've never gone back to Canaan Valley. I don't hike, don't camp, don't even walk far from sidewalks anymore. But every so often, when I'm alone in my apartment at night, I hear 2 soft knocks at the door. And Daisy, who I ended up adopting after the couple passed, still refuses to sleep anywhere but pressed against it. I was 31 when I made the mistake that still haunts me. By then I was working as an EMT out of Asheville, the kind of job that eats your nerves piece by piece. After too many night shifts, too many sirens, and too many patients who didn't make it, I thought I could cure myself by going deep into the mountains alone. I wasn't new to it. I'd done long solo treks in Pisgah, even a stretch out in Olympic when I was younger. But this time I wanted something different. Not just quiet. Erasure. I planned a 5-day route through the Bald Knob Wilderness in northern Georgia, where the Cayuga Ridge bleeds into North Carolina. It was the kind of place with so few trail reports online that most of the posts were years old, half warnings and half boasting about how nobody goes out there. That was exactly what I wanted, nobody. Originally, I was supposed to have company. My friend Angela, who worked dispatch, and her boyfriend Rob had promised to come. But 2 days before we left, she caught a stomach bug, and Rob bailed with her. They told me to postpone. But I'd already asked for the time off, already packed, already convinced myself this trip was a reset button. So I went. Alone. I left early Friday, driving past towns that looked like they'd died decades ago. A ranger station sat at the edge of the wilderness, boarded windows, vines climbing the siding. It didn't look active, but a rusted drop box still held a faded trail ledger. I scrawled my name and route, though even then I knew nobody was likely to check. The first stretch of trail was narrow, half-eaten by laurel and briars, but still passable. I saw no one. By sunset, I found a creek and set up my tent. The water ran clear, tumbling over stones, but it made no sound. None. I could see it bubbling and rolling, but heard nothing. My ears rang in the quiet. I told myself I was just too used to the city. I crawled into my tent early, read a few chapters of a paperback, and fell asleep. When I woke at dawn, the silence pressed even heavier. No birds. No insects. No breeze. I packed up, telling myself the hush was just mountain stillness. Day 2, the trail grew steep. Pines gave way to a valley of bare oaks, the trunks stripped in spirals, as though peeled by giant hands. Between them I noticed little stacks of flat stones, balanced in neat towers, each one perfectly arranged. Too fresh, too clean. No moss on them. No leaf litter caught in the cracks. They looked like they'd been built minutes earlier. The map didn't match what I was seeing. Compass said east, but the lay of the land twisted wrong. Still I pressed on. Near dusk, I stumbled into a clearing. Snack wrappers. Blackened ash. A loop of shoelaces tied tight around a root. Not dropped, bound there deliberately. My gut told me to keep moving, but my legs were done. I set up camp. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of steady footsteps. Not the shuffle of a deer. Not the crash of a bear. Deliberate. Circling. I grabbed the knife I keep beside my sleeping bag. The steps made a wide ring around my tent once, then again. Then stopped. I heard breathing. Long, deep nasal exhalations just inches from the nylon wall. My skin tightened, every hair standing. I didn't move. Didn't blink. The breathing went on for minutes before it faded. When light broke, I checked. Nothing. Not a print. Not a bent blade of grass. On the 3rd day, I turned off the route I'd mapped, hoping to cut back toward the ridgeline. Around noon, I found a tree with a crude carving burned into the trunk, a circle with an X through it. I'd seen photos of similar things online, labeled everything from old hunting marks to occult warnings. Seeing it in person, hacked deep into raw wood, made me feel like it had been waiting for me. That afternoon, I smelled something rancid before I saw it. Ahead, a tree had been split wide open. Not lightning, there were no scorch marks. The inside had been hollowed. From its branches hung scraps of clothing, torn jackets, stained shirts, even a pair of boots laced together and slung over a limb. One shirt had a name tag sewn inside, but the name had been clawed through so hard the fabric tore. The stink was metallic and rotten, like pennies left in meat. I gagged and stumbled past without investigating further. I didn't light a fire that night, just pitched my tent in a hollow between boulders. I stayed dressed, knife in hand. Around midnight, the steps returned. Heavier this time. They circled once, then stopped. And then came a voice. Daniel. It used my name. Perfectly. But wrong. Too long on the vowels, as though stretched across broken teeth. Then another voice repeated it from the opposite side of the tent. Daniel. They weren't echoes. They overlapped, slightly off, like two recordings out of sync. My chest froze. Then something pressed into the fabric. A hand. 5 points of pressure. It dragged slowly in circles, as if mapping the outline of me inside. I couldn't breathe. Then something dropped hard on top of the tent. The weight crushed down, squeezing air from my lungs. My ribs groaned. And then gone. Silence, absolute. When daylight came, I found nothing but a dent in the tent's fabric. No prints. No broken branches. I hiked 20 miles without stopping, lungs burning. I wanted out. By the 5th day, I stumbled back to the ranger station. The door was padlocked, the windows dark. I shoved my signed sheet into the drop box and drove without turning on the radio, without looking in the rear view. Back home, I searched for that symbol online. I found fragments on obscure forums in scanned folklore collections. A Cherokee tale about something called the Ashmouth, a creature that mimics. Not a ghost, not a bear, not human. It wears the skins of what it hunts, but the voice is never right. The post said the Ashmouth doesn't chase. It waits. It circles. It learns your name. And once it calls you twice, once in front and once behind, you're marked. I tell myself I made it out. I tell myself it didn't follow. But last month, walking back from a late shift, I passed an alley. And from inside the dark, my name stretched out, just wrong enough to freeze my veins. I was 24 the summer my roommate convinced me to go somewhere I should have never agreed to. My name's Alex, and back then I was working part-time as a landscaper while finishing night classes in criminal justice. I was exhausted, broke, and sick of the city, so when my roommate Evan tossed an old trail map on the kitchen table and said, "Let's do something different," I didn't push back. Different, in his definition, meant a forgotten trail in the Tugalo forest near the Georgia-South Carolina line. I'd never hiked that stretch. Most people didn't. Even online forums barely mentioned it except in scattered comments about strange lights and don't camp past the ridge. Evan, of course, had latched on to those exact details. He wanted to test himself. He said it like we were still teenagers, daring each other to sneak into abandoned houses. I told him I didn't have the time. He laughed, reminded me I'd been dragging myself home every night half asleep, and said, "A couple of nights in the woods might fix your brain." I should have said no, but I didn't. We drove out in his rusted Jeep, 3 hours of winding back roads until the pavement gave way to gravel, and the gravel gave way to a two-rut track lined with pines. The trailhead wasn't marked, just a tilted post with no sign attached. Evan grinned like he'd just discovered buried treasure. The first stretch was steep but ordinary. Blazes painted on trees, trickling streams, birds chattering. I could almost convince myself it was just another hike. But an hour in, the markers stopped. The ground narrowed to what looked more like a deer path than a human trail. The woods pressed tighter. By the time we reached the cabin, sweat had soaked through my shirt and my legs ached. Calling it a cabin was generous. It was a collapsed shack. Half the roof caved in, chimney leaning like it wanted to fall, door dangling off rusted hinges. Inside smelled of damp wood and rot. Cobwebs laced every corner, and someone long ago had strung tin scraps from the rafters like makeshift chimes. They clinked when a breeze slipped through cracks in the walls, a sound too fragile to feel natural. Evan looked thrilled. He dropped his pack, dug out a bottle of cheap whiskey, and declared, "Home sweet home." We built a fire outside. He roasted hot dogs on sticks while I sat staring into the tree line. The sun dipped low. When shadows grew thick, Evan started telling the story that had hooked him in the first place. "They called her Esther Crane," he said, eyes fixed on the fire. "Her boy vanished near this hollow. Some say he slipped into the river, some say he was taken. She never stopped searching, carried a lantern every night until she couldn't walk anymore. Folks swore even after she was bedridden, they'd see her light floating in the trees." I rolled my eyes. Urban legend. Maybe. But they say if you see the lantern up close, don't follow. It isn't her anymore. And if it calls your name, he ran a finger across his throat. "Real subtle," I muttered, tossing a stick into the flames. But my stomach had nodded. Around 10, Evan grabbed a flashlight, said he had to take a leak, and wandered into the dark. I waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. I called his name. No answer. I told myself he was messing with me. That was his style. Still, unease gnawed at me until I picked up the old lantern he'd brought. A heavy metal thing with thick glass he'd bragged about finding at a pawn shop, and lit it. At the edge of the trees, I froze. A light glowed between the trunks. Not the white beam of Evan's flashlight. This one was soft, yellow, swaying low like it dangled from a hand. My chest tightened, because I was still holding our lantern. I stepped closer. The glow shifted sideways, smooth as if gliding. "Evan!" I called. No reply. I turned back toward the cabin, and that's when I saw it, another light. This one much nearer, only yards away, floating between the trees. I ran. Instinct took over. I clutched the lantern so tight the handle cut into my palm and sprinted until my legs burned. I dropped behind a log, gasping, trying to quiet my breath. The forest had gone silent. Then more lights appeared. 3 of them. 2 close, 1 farther back. They blinked in and out like fireflies, too large, too deliberate. Branches cracked nearby, but I couldn't see what made the sound. And then came the voice. High, strained, brittle as glass. At first a whisper, repeating a name I couldn't catch. Then louder, ragged, a scream torn from a throat that had been screaming too long. I clamped my hands over my ears. The lantern slipped from my grip, landing in the dirt. I curled against the log, eyes shut, until another beam cut the dark. White, steady. A flashlight. I staggered toward it. A man stepped from behind a tree. Ranger uniform. Mid-30s. He looked shocked to see me. I barreled straight into him. "Where's your friend?" he asked. I shook my head, words tangled. He went into the woods." The ranger's eyes flicked to the lantern I'd dropped. His expression tightened. "Where'd you get that?" "The cabin," I stammered. He didn't touch it. Didn't even move closer. His jaw clenched. "Leave it. We're going." I didn't argue. We walked back to his truck in silence. He scanned the trees the whole time, hand brushing the radio at his belt. At the ranger station, under fluorescent lights that made everything feel too sharp, he finally spoke. "We've had reports for years. Lights. Voices. Always the same lantern. People go missing. Some are found days later, wandering without memory. Some aren't found at all." I asked about Evan. He just shook his head. "We'll search. But if he followed it," he didn't finish. I never saw Evan again. It's been 5 years. I don't camp anymore. I barely leave the city. But sometimes late at night, when I'm driving home from work, I catch a flicker in the trees along the highway. Soft. Yellow. Swaying like it's being carried. And once, only once, I swear I heard my own name drift from the dark, stretched thin, brittle as glass. My name is Daniel. I was 42 when I decided to leave Pittsburgh for a while. I taught history at a high school there. Long hours, grading papers deep into the night, phone buzzing nonstop with parents and administrators. I loved my subject, but hated what the job was doing to me. My marriage had ended the year before, not in flames but in silence, just 2 people drifting until there was nothing left. Lately I'd been waking up with a strange pressure in my chest, like a weight I couldn't move. I told myself I needed a reset, someplace away from deadlines and emails, somewhere I could hear my own thoughts without the noise of a city. I found a cabin rental posted on an obscure forum that listed off-grid getaways. It promised complete seclusion, no cell service, tucked along the edge of the Unaka Mountains near the North Carolina border. The description even warned about the access road, said it was steep gravel and not always cleared, and urged visitors to bring supplies in bulk. For me, that was perfect. I packed enough food to last a week, tossed my camping gear in the back of my SUV, and set out on a humid Saturday morning in late June. The drive became rougher the higher I climbed. Paved road gave way to switchbacks barely wide enough for 1 car. My tires sprayed gravel over the edge of steep drop-offs, and twice I had to slow nearly to a crawl because fallen limbs blocked the path. By the time I reached the cabin, my shoulders ached from gripping the wheel. The place was smaller than I'd pictured. 1 floor, its roof drooping like an old man's hat, with siding faded to the color of bone. Ferns crowded the steps, and the porch sagged as if it regretted the effort of holding itself up. The key waited in a cracked ceramic turtle beside the stoop. Inside it smelled of cedar and dust. The furnishings were sparse. A cot with springs that whined when I sat down, a cast iron stove, a table scarred with cigarette burns, and 2 mismatched chairs. A bookshelf slumped against the far wall, its spines warped and swollen from humidity. A laminated map hung above the door, showing trails scribbled in red ink. Some had numbers beside them, some only strange symbols I didn't recognize. That first evening I lit an oil lantern and brewed instant coffee. Around midnight, just as my body began to sink into the chair, I heard it, a crack of wood outside, not loud but sharp. Then another, slower, as though someone was testing where to place their feet. I switched off the lantern and sat still, pulse in my throat. I waited for a knock, a voice, something human. Nothing came. Minutes passed before exhaustion dulled my fear. I must have dozed off with my head against the wall because I woke at dawn stiff and cold, the coffee untouched beside me. The next morning I decided to try one of the marked trails. It looped behind the cabin, just under 2 miles, according to the map. I packed water and stepped into the trees. The woods here felt older than the ones I knew in Pennsylvania. Pines pressed close on one side, hardwoods tangled with vines on the other, making the path more like a suggestion than a road. After maybe half an hour, I noticed the sign. It was nailed to a birch at eye level, weathered in gray, with words carved deep enough to still be legible. No humming past dusk. I stopped short. The message was strange, oddly specific. I snapped a photo with my phone out of habit, though there was no signal to send it anywhere. I laughed nervously to myself, muttering something about local kids with a sense of humor, but a chill settled over me anyway. The trail became harder after that, overgrown, littered with branches. I turned back sooner than planned. On the way down, I found a second sign, carved with the same warning. This one was gouged with 4 vertical slashes, as if someone, or something, had dragged claws through the wood. They were too deliberate for storm damage. My throat went dry. That night, I ate canned soup and played solitaire on a sticky deck of cards left in the drawer. Just after 1 in the morning, the sound returned. Heavy footsteps in the gravel outside, circling slowly. Something brushed against the porch rail, not scraping like metal but sliding like skin. I gripped my flashlight and opened the door, my breath shallow. The beam stretched maybe 15 feet, barely denting the wall of trees. Nothing moved, but what froze me wasn't what I saw. It was what I didn't hear. The forest was mute. No crickets, no frogs, not even wind. It was as if the world had been emptied of sound, left hollow for something else to step into. My chest tightened with the certainty that silence itself was the threat. I shut the door and locked it, though the lock looked older than me. Sleep never came. By the next afternoon, nerves drove me into town. I ended up in a place called Irwin, a handful of buildings strung along a main road. I stopped at a bait and tackle shop. Behind the counter was a man with leathery skin, probably in his 50s. When I asked about the trail signs, his expression didn't change. "Old warning," he said after a long pause. "Some folks here call it the Murmurer." The name made the skin on my arms prickle. I asked what that meant. He shook his head once. "Don't hum after dark. That's all you need to know." His tone left no room for humor. I told myself not to let a campfire tale ruin my trip, but curiosity gnawed at me. That evening, just before the sun sank, I walked the same path again, convincing myself I wanted more pictures. I hadn't gone more than a mile when I heard it, for low notes drifting from the hollow below the ridge. It wasn't a whistle this time, it was humming. The sound was faint, human enough to chill me, steady like someone singing under their breath. My knees went weak. I turned back fast, nearly running, and didn't breathe right until the cabin came into view. That night I dragged a chair against the door and left every light blazing, including the one above the porch. At 12:30 a.m. the footsteps came again, circling wider this time. Something traced a long, dry drag against the wallboards. Then silence thicker than before, a silence that seemed to crawl into my head. I thought I heard faint humming from inside the walls themselves, as if the wood carried a voice through its grain. By morning I debated leaving, but pride, or maybe stubbornness, kept me there. Around noon I stepped outside to gather kindling and froze. In the dirt behind the cabin were impressions, for evenly spaced grooves, each the length of a finger. They weren't dragged like claw marks. They were pressed deep, deliberate, like something had rested its weight on talons and waited. My scalp tingled cold. I crammed my belongings into bags, not bothering to fold clothes, just stuffing and zipping. As I moved through the cabin one last time, a sound slipped through the kitchen window. A low hum, 4 notes again, soft, close enough to stir the glass. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the keys. For half a minute I couldn't move. The hum died off, swallowed by silence, and then I bolted. I didn't look back. I didn't lock the door. I didn't even check if the hatch of the SUV was closed all the way. I drove until the tires hit pavement again, then kept driving until I saw the green glow of a gas station. Inside, I told the clerk in a shaking voice that I'd heard something, that it was humming. He didn't look surprised. He just nodded. "You saw the signs, didn't you?" "Yes," I said. "Then you're fortunate." His voice was matter of fact, as if I'd barely escaped some routine hazard. "What does it do?" I asked. He studied me a long moment, then said, It doesn't show itself. It waits. It listens. If you hum, it hears it as an invitation. And when someone calls, he stopped, his eyes narrowing, it answers. That was all. No instructions, no warnings on how to keep it away. Just that final word, answers. I left without buying anything. I drove straight back to Pittsburgh, 6 hours without stopping, my body shaking the whole way. It has been 6 years now, and I haven't stepped foot on a trail again. Yet sometimes, in the dead of night when the city is finally quiet, I think I hear it, a low hum threading through the silence of my apartment, as if something still waits, patient and certain, for me to answer back. I was 28 when I made the kind of decision that only feels smart when you're restless and stupid enough to think a change of scenery can fix what's broken inside. At the time, I was working nights as a paramedic in Charleston, burned out from years of answering calls where people expected you to keep them alive with duct tape and willpower. I'd started drinking too much after shifts, nodding off in front of my laptop with the TV buzzing in the background. My girlfriend had just moved out, taking the dog and leaving a note that said only, "You're never really here." She was right. I hadn't been present in my own life for months. That's when my college friend Marcus called. He'd been dumped after a long-term relationship and wanted distraction, not sympathy. He said he found a cheap cabin rental in the Cumberland Plateau, not far from the Kentucky border. No neighbors, no signal, nothing but trees and old trails. "We'll hike during the day, drink at night, forget the world," he said. At the time, I was looking for any excuse not to sit alone with silence. I said yes before thinking. Marcus also invited his younger brother Dylan, who I barely knew. Dylan was wiry and nervous, the kind of guy who kept twitching his hands like he was always waiting for bad news. He wore an oversized military coat, even though the June heat made us sweat through our shirts. He chain-smoked cheap cigarettes that smelled harsh and chemical. The three of us left on a Friday afternoon, winding through back roads until the asphalt ended. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt lane that felt like it hadn't been maintained since the Carter administration. By the time we arrived, it was close to midnight. The place looked abandoned, roof sagging, siding pale and splintered, one bulb buzzing weakly above the door. Inside, the floorboards groaned with every step, and the furniture looked like it had been dragged out of an abandoned church basement. No television, no radio, not even a clock ticking on the wall. Just silence that settled in your ears like water. We dropped our bags, cracked beers, and let Marcus's Bluetooth speaker fill the hollow rooms with old rock songs. The music bounced around the walls, echoing in ways that made the place feel bigger and emptier than it was. At some point past midnight, Dylan broke the mood by asking, "You guys ever hear about the Lantern Man?" Marcus groaned, rolling his eyes. "Christ, here we go." But Dylan was serious. He leaned forward, smoke curling around his face. "My dad told me when I was a kid. Folks around here don't talk about it unless they've had a drink. He's not a ghost, not exactly. He carries a lantern, but it doesn't light the ground. It lights faces. If you see him once, he's far away. Twice, he's closer. The third time, it means you're marked." I laughed too loud, trying to keep the story from digging in under my skin. "So what, he kidnaps people?" Dylan shook his head slowly. "No, he remembers them." The words landed like a stone in my chest. We went quiet. Eventually Marcus raised his beer and said, "Cheers to dumb legends." But I couldn't shake the image, the Lantern Man with his strange light. Later, around 1:30 in the morning, I stepped outside to piss. The air had gone dead. No crickets, no rustle of leaves, no night chorus. Just thick silence pressing down on the woods. As I finished, I saw something at the far end of the trail, a faint glow. Not like a flashlight, too steady. It hovered chest high, pale and hazy, like the wick of an old oil lamp. My throat tightened. I blinked hard, and when I opened my eyes, it was gone. I walked backward to the cabin without turning, every step deliberate. I didn't mention it when I went back inside. The next morning Dylan made awful coffee with a dented percolator he'd brought. We chewed granola bars in silence until Marcus suggested a hike. Dylan said there was an old trail his father had shown him as a kid, one that led to a collapsed fire tower. We followed him up rocky inclines through thick laurel thickets. The tower was nothing more than rusted steel bones jutting out of the earth, but the view stretched across rolling ridges hazed with summer heat. On the way back, the sun dipping orange through the trees, I felt eyes on us. My skin prickled. I glanced behind and froze. 50 feet back, beyond the trees, a pale glow hovered between the trunks. Not bright enough to illuminate the ground, but enough to paint the shape of a figure holding it. Tall, unmoving, arms stiff at its sides. My stomach flipped. "Marcus," I whispered. He looked up from tying his boot, saw nothing, and kept walking. By the time I looked back, the light was gone. That night I lay awake, listening to the cabin breathe and shift. Around 3, I pulled back the curtain. At the edge of the clearing, 20 feet away, the lantern glowed. A figure stood behind it, face blurred by light, as if the flame itself erased features. My body locked. I let the curtain fall and backed into the room, heart hammering. I shook Marcus awake. "There's someone out there." He stumbled to the window, looked, then frowned. "There's nothing. You're wrecked from work, man. You're seeing shadows." Dylan didn't say a word. He just sat smoking, his eyes fixed on the floor. The following afternoon, Marcus went hiking alone, claiming he needed air. Dylan and I stayed at the cabin. I sat on the porch with a bottle of bourbon, scanning the tree line. The forest felt wrong, like every leaf had turned toward me. That's when I saw it again. 10 feet away this time, no pretense of distance. The lantern glowed softly, and behind it stood the figure. Too tall, its shoulders uneven, head tilted like it didn't understand the angle of its own neck. Its clothing looked like shadows sewn together, not fabric. Where the face should have been, light shimmered like water, warping the trees in its glow. I dropped the bottle, stumbling backward inside. "I saw it," I hissed. "I saw him." Dylan finally spoke. His voice shook. "If you see his light, he knows you. If you see his face, he keeps you." "What the hell does that mean?" I snapped. "It means we don't sleep tonight. We leave at dawn." We shoved furniture against the door, stacked chairs under the windows, and sat clutching kitchen knives like children with talismans. At some point, exhaustion dragged me under. I woke to the sound of wood sliding against wood. Then a slow knock, just once, against the front door. I crept to the peephole. The lantern's glow filled it, so bright it drowned everything else. For a split second, I saw my own eye staring back, reflected in the shimmer where a face should be. My breath caught. My body wouldn't move. I backed away, pressing my spine against the wall, shaking until the first gray smear of dawn broke through the window. When we opened the door, nothing remained. No footprints, no marks, only a faint odor that reminded me of wet matches and singed metal. We packed in silence, didn't speak for 4 straight hours on the drive home. Dylan moved out west a few weeks later. Marcus refuses to talk about that weekend, even when drunk. As for me, I haven't stepped foot on a trail since. But sometimes, when my apartment goes still at night, I see a faint glow ripple against the glass of my window. Not bright enough to light the room, just enough to blur my reflection. And every time I turn away, I feel the weight of something remembering me, patient, steady, carrying its light closer. My name's Aaron, and I was 36 when I learned the hard way that the old tales my father used to mutter about weren't just meant to spook kids around a campfire. That fall had been a brutal one. I'd just left my job teaching history at a small college outside of Richmond. Technically, I resigned, though everyone knew it was mutual. Students stopped showing up, administrators stopped caring, and somewhere along the way, I stopped pretending. My wife had taken our daughter to visit her family in Atlanta for the week. She said I needed a reset more than anything. I agreed, though my version of a reset wasn't a beach or a spa, it was silence. I found the cabin on a thread buried deep in an outdoors forum, the kind where people still typed like it was the late 90s. The post was from someone named Curtis who said he had a real private place available on the western edge of the Smokies, about an hour's drive from a town called Cullibate. No pictures, no reviews, just a phone number. When I called, he answered like he was half asleep. Said the place was back in the folds, and not for everyone. That sounded right to me. The road narrowed the deeper I drove into the hills. Asphalt turned to gravel, gravel to dirt. Trees pressed in so close their branches brushed my truck. When the forest finally opened, the cabin revealed itself as if it had been waiting. Rough-hewn logs gray with age, a roof bowing inward, one chimney coughing out a thin stream of smoke that made me wonder if someone else had been here. The windows were nothing but dark rectangles, no glass, just openings covered with warped wooden shutters. I stepped out and felt the quiet wrap around me. It wasn't the kind of peace you get on a lake in summer. This was heavier, expectant. I carried my bag inside, finding bare furnishings. A cot with a quilt thin as paper, a small stove with rust climbing its legs, a table scarred by knife marks, and shelves holding a few swollen paperbacks. I almost laughed. This wasn't a vacation spot. It was a holding cell someone forgot to lock. That first night I sat outside by a shallow fire pit, sipping bourbon from a tin cup. The flames snapped and spat, the sound oddly sharp against the stillness. For a moment my mind quieted. Then came the sound of leaves shifting under careful weight. One step, pause, another step. It wasn't fast or frantic. It was deliberate, like something, or someone, was making sure I knew it was there without showing itself. My breath caught. I told myself it was a deer, maybe even a bear. Still, I doused the fire early, retreated inside, and slid the wooden bar across the door. Sleep never came. I lay with my eyes open until gray light seeped through the cracks in the shutters. The next morning I remembered something my father used to say about these mountains. He'd grown up not far from here, the son of a logger. He'd tell me about a place they called Hollow Step, an old trail people avoided. He never finished the story. He'd just say, "Past the stone bridge, you don't belong." I'd rolled my eyes at him as a teenager, thinking he was just trying to keep me from sneaking off. But with the cabin so close to the Smokies, curiosity burned in me. I wanted to find out what he'd been talking about. By midday I'd discovered what I thought was the start of Hollow Step. The marker was nearly invisible, just a split log leaning against a tree with a triangle carved into it. Leaves covered most of the path. It felt like trespassing on something long forgotten. I walked for an hour, maybe more. The further I went, the more wrong the woods felt. No birds. No insects. Even the air seemed to hang heavy, refusing to stir. My own footsteps sounded too loud, too foreign. That's when I reached the bridge. It wasn't stone like my father had said, but crumbling concrete, its edges cracked and lined with moss, spanning nothing but a dry gully. A single ribbon of cloth, sun-bleached and brittle, hung from the railing, fluttering slightly though there was no breeze. Everything in me screamed not to cross. I almost listened. Almost. The bridge groaned beneath me as I stepped forward, the hollow knock of my boots echoing strangely. At the midpoint, something dangled from a branch nearby, a necklace of bones, vertebrae strung together with rusty wire. Beneath it, a skull, small, maybe a raccoon's, bleached to unnatural whiteness. Its sockets seemed to follow me. I quickened my pace. Then I saw more bones ahead, arranged in patterns on the ground. Circles, spirals, lines crossing each other. Some were animal. Some looked disturbingly human. Fingers bent at impossible angles, ribs threaded with twine. I spun around to go back, but the path looked different. Trees leaned closer. The light dimmed though the sun hadn't set. My skin prickled with the certainty of being watched. I didn't hear movement, but I felt it, eyes on me from every direction. My pulse raced. Then I heard it, a breath wet and rattling too close. It didn't match mine. I ran. Branches clawed at my face, thorns tore my jeans, but I didn't dare look back. If I looked, I knew I'd see something I couldn't live with. By some miracle, I burst onto the dirt road near the cabin, collapsing in the gravel, gasping like I'd never learned how to breathe. Inside, I locked everything that could lock, dragged a chair under the handle, and clutched a flashlight like it was a weapon. Every creak of the cabin made me twitch. Hours passed in a haze of terror until close to midnight, a new sound came. Dragging, wet and steady, sliding along the outer wall. I aimed the light, but it showed nothing. Then a thud against the door. Then whispers, too low to make out, circling the cabin. I froze. The door handle turned slowly, testing, not forcing. I sat rigid until dawn. By morning I'd made up my mind to leave. I shoved my bag into the truck, barely glancing inside the cabin one last time. That's when I saw it. In the dirt outside the back window were prints. For long depressions, each too wide for a hand, too deep for any animal I knew. They weren't dragged. They'd been pressed. Markers. I drove until I found signal, until a diner's neon sign blinked through my windshield. I told the waitress I'd gotten sick, needed to cut my trip short. I called my wife, said I'd be home early. But before heading back, I went to see my father. I told him everything. He didn't laugh. He didn't call me tired or drunk. He just stared at the floor and finally said, "You went past the bridge." I asked what it meant. His voice dropped low. "They mark you if you cross. Hollow Step doesn't let go once it knows your name." I pressed him for more, but he wouldn't answer. He just turned his face away like a man ashamed. That was 3 years ago. Since then, I haven't set foot on a trail. But sometimes, in the quiet between waking and sleep, I hear it again, that labored, waterlogged breath. And in mirrors, just at the corner of my vision, I swear I see the faint outline of a bridge I never should have crossed.